her know she can touch base with any of us, and we'll make sure that
Okay.
We can help her get in.
Okay, so I just messaged her. I'll please maybe Tessa and Camille keep an eye on your text to see if we need to resend Emily the panelist link. But I'm just going to get us started here and walk us through the first 2-3 minutes of introductory business while we wait for Emily to hopefully join us. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. This is a subcommittee meeting, the Land Use Governance and Sovereignty Subcommittee, a subcommittee of the California Agricultural Land Equity Task Force. This subcommittee was recently formed at the task force August meeting. So this is our first meeting together. My name is Megan Wiley. I'm with Sacramento State University, providing facilitation support for the subcommittee and the task force, and also providing staff support with us today is Tessa Salzman. You can see her. And then in the room, in the physical meeting location, we have Camille Frazier and Caleb Swanson. I'm going to run through quick Zoom and participation guidelines. We go through these at the start of every meeting, but just generally, we're here to exchange ideas, of course, because we're developing recommendations together. So just all ideas and points of view have value, and not just during task force conversations, but when we're hearing from the public as well. And everyone has been really, really great about this, but please, just a friendly reminder to keep the tone and conversation mutually respectful of everyone, and to stay on point. So today we're specifically talking about topics underneath the land use governance and sovereignty dimension or umbrella. And there is some space for general public comments towards the end of the day. We're here together for 1 hour. Zoom tips, we've got a couple of folks joining us as attendees. So this is a meeting of the task force open to the public, but we do have space, as I just mentioned, for public comment at the end of our primary agenda session, as well as a general session towards the end. So folks are all muted upon entry, but if you're interested to share a comment, we'll help you with that, and you'll be asked to unmute when it's your time to speak, and we'll help keep a discussion queue. And what's helpful for us is if you use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so that way we'll get in the discussion, know when to unmute you for the discussion queue. We also have use of the Q&A function today, and we can respond. We as staff support and panelists can respond to you as attendees using the Q&A feature. So that's just kind of a mechanism for some back and forth, mostly for tech support. We will ask you if you have a public comment to not use the Q&A, but to read it into the record. We are recording this meeting as we do with all meetings of the task force. Quick agenda review, and then we'll introduce the two task force members here so that we can establish quorum after we're done settling in here. But today is a working session, so we have 1 hour, and we propose to review the work plan that was introduced during the recent August full task force meeting, specifically looking at the components related to land use governance and sovereignty. In the work plan, we call this the dimension of land use governance and sovereignty. I also like to think of it as kind of an overarching umbrella topic. The work plan identified some more specific subtopics underneath that. So we're going to use that as a platform for conversation today. And then staff has thought through a proposal for some next steps on how do we advance some of these ideas, always looking towards that end goal of developing recommendations within that time frame that we have together. And so these are just ideas. We're putting them out on the table because most often it is a lot easier to react to something than to come up with something together on the spot. So just ideas, a space for us to initiate our conversations. We'll save just a few minutes at the end where I'll support our team here with summarizing action items and next steps. And we'll look at a time frame for our next meeting, what's working for our two subcommittee members, Dorian and Emily. And then we'll check in for public comment at the end. If you're a member of the public, not a task force member, but a member of the public, and you're interested to issue public comment, please complete this form and maybe take a quick screenshot of this if you like. This form is available on the project website. And if you ask us to put it in Q&A, we can then respond in Q&A and give you that link. But it's sgc.ca.gov/meetings-events. And then we'll just use that to help with public comment. If you're joining as a task force member, just a reminder, you're in observation mode only. So task force members attending our subcommittee meetings can only listen in, can't issue public comment. Okay, and let's quickly establish quorum. With us this afternoon, Vice Chair Emily Burgueño. I see you joined.
Hauke, hello. Here.
Wonderful. And member Dorian Payan.
Present.
Wonderful. Emily and Dorian, how does our plan for today sound? Pretty good, or any comments on the approach?
Sounds good.
Ditto.
Wonderful. Okay, so working session, I'm going to turn it over to Camille to walk us through the next couple of slides. And please, Camille, let me know when to advance.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Megan. And thank you, Dorian and Emily, for taking this work on. We're excited to have this conversation today and see where it goes from here. So Megan, if you'll click to the next slide. With the way we thought we could go about this process would be with a quick review of the excerpt of that work plan that you reviewed and provided feedback on in our August task force meeting. We pulled out the sections that are specific to the land use, governance, and sovereignty piece of that work plan. So we want to do a quick review of that. It's also in the briefing materials that were sent out in advance of the meeting, just to make sure that all of that was still adding up for you. If you had any sort of strong reactions to that, any thoughts about how you want to make sure that work, those topics, those issues are in this subcommittee. And then spend some time with a proposal that we as staff developed for you. As Megan said in her introductory comments, really it is just a proposal. So it's a way for you to think through how you, as right now a two-person subcommittee, want to continue to advance that work toward recommendations that will then of course be shared with the full task force, discussed with the full task force, and decided on actions and next steps. So we'll do that quick review, and then we'll have some time to really maybe bounce back and forth between that work plan excerpt and then the proposal, which really is like a timeline for this subcommittee's work moving forward. So that's the plan for here. And of course, it is a small group of us, right, in this meeting. So do feel free to just unmute, jump in, and we can kind of bounce around as you see fit and make sure that this meeting is really aligning with what you're hoping to do in the subcommittee. So if all sounds good, let's please advance to next slide. Thank you. So we thought we'd just start with a small piece of that work plan. If you remember the full work plan that was introduced in August and that staff are now currently doing the work of revising to reflect the comments and the conversations of August. That work plan had 3 dimensions of land equity. Those dimensions were then, as task force members know, those dimensions were then used to establish 3 new subcommittees. So this is the Land Use, Governance, and Sovereignty Subcommittee. And this is how it is currently described with some revisions that came through that August meeting in the work plan. So that land use, governance, and sovereignty, we're approaching that dimension of land equity by meaning what is allowable and possible, who decides, and how decisions are made and upheld once an individual, entity, organization, or government has access. Land use is defined broadly to include a range of values and stewardship and cultural practices. So that's right now our, brief but hopefully helpful approach to what is meant by this phrase. So I wanted to pause here for a moment and just see, Dorian and Emily, if this has kind of the broadest scope understanding of what this particular set of topics, what you might like to do and explore in this subcommittee when we use the phrase land use governance and sovereignty. Any reactions, thoughts, questions?
Yeah, I think this looks great. I think perhaps I would add to what end as well, because I think there's the piece of what's allowable and possible, but also really putting a value forward or the intentions of the Land Equity Task Force forward. Of like, thinking of doing this to what end.
Very helpful. It's a great point. Thank you for that. Okay. Yeah, well, sorry, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to kind of mention, so I know that it's oftentimes kind of tough to look at language on the spot. And I think we'll have different opportunities to wordsmith this if this is some text that may likely, or some version of this text may likely get carried over into your recommendations report as framing language. So it's good to just kind of hold this in your mind, and then we can work on massaging it and making it as strong as you would like it to be once it gets, moved towards a publication.
Yes, thank you for that reminder, Megan. And yeah, I think this is just a way for us to check in and make sure that the kind of scope at its broadest makes sense to you as members of the subcommittee. But to Megan's point, this will be something that we're hoping you can assist and really help develop the language as we move toward those drafting phases. There aren't other thoughts on this. We can move to the next slide, which is going to be a bit of a lot of text is what it's going to be. And the reason why this is a lot of text is because this is taken from that work plan. Hopefully it will look familiar to you. It has been modified slightly to incorporate feedback that we received in the August meeting, but otherwise it is an exact sort of representation of what that work plan looks like. It's specific to the land use governance and sovereignty dimension of land equity. So we had shared this in advance in the briefing materials and then wanted to put it here. And I'm going to say a couple things to just explain this. And then I'm going to give Dorian and Emily you a few minutes just to kind of remind yourself of these things and reflect on them a bit. And then see whether there's anything that immediately you'd like to share out or suggest as like particularly high priority for this subcommittee, right? But let me first clarify the red text that's there. SNCR stands for the Sustaining Natural and Cultural Resources Subcommittee. Those are notes where that subcommittee, which was actually our very first subcommittee to meet, and it was established after the May meeting, has already started to advance some of these ideas and sort of requested information of staff, right, that would help to advance these ideas or to consider these ideas. So we wanted to note those. That work is being moved forward in that subcommittee, and this subcommittee might want to consider ways to either collaborate or to just distinguish which subcommittees are doing which pieces of this land use governance and sovereignty puzzle, which of course spans all aspects of what the task force is doing. And then the other little red text there you'll see in housing. We noticed after kind of putting this together, really housing is like a kind of a sub-component, right, of these other two topics. So housing is restricted in some ways, it's prioritized in others, and that is really something to consider when you're thinking about land use restrictions, right, when you're thinking about easements, right, stuff like that. And then, of course, when you're thinking about state and federal priorities and the legislation that impacts land use. So I wanted to clarify what those were. Are there any just like kind of questions from either of you? And otherwise, we're just gonna kind of let you read through this for a couple of minutes, spend a little quiet time reviewing. Sounds okay? Maybe a thumbs up or something. So, oh, Emily, I see you unmuted. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I was gonna review it. I don't have no immediate reactions because I was just listening to you, and then, like you said, we'll dive in, give a pause to dive in to read it.
Yes, perfect. That sounds great. So yeah, take a little time. We can, if it makes sense to both of you, you can sort of, as you're done, you can raise your hand if you'd like in that way, or we'll just plan to give like 5-7 minutes and let you both review this.
I don't think I have any additional feedback. I'm pretty sure I was helping with those comments from the natural resources or natural cultural resources subcommittee.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Yes, a lot of that was generated in that subcommittee. So we appreciate the work that's already been done in that space. It really helped to build out this component of land equity. Thank you. Thank you for that. Dorian, would you like a little more time?
I think I'm good. Yeah. Would we offer feedback now, or how does it?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple ways to do this. Yes, feedback would be very welcome here. And then the next slide, just to give you a preview, the next slide is really going to be to try to like mobilize what you just saw into the work of the subcommittee. So I just want to, let's not focus on this if we could actually go back, Megan, but Dorian, to give you a sense. So if you do have feedback on these ideas or things that are missing, right, language changes, please share that now. But also think about how you might want to focus on some of this as a subcommittee. Is anything especially high priority? Number one, got to do that first. Like that kind of feedback would also be welcome. And Emily, of course, from you as well. So yeah, Dorian, if you had something you wanted to share right now, please.
Sure. I can add to maybe the land. Well, I guess it could fit to all three categories, but And I appreciate you all detailing the SNCR pieces that are, being cross-referenced, because I'm trying to remember, we formed a couple of subcommittees, so I'm just trying to remember, if this is already relevant in another subcommittee. But I think adding to this, like the policy, the existing policy limitations and language, I think that are offered through land use planning grants, things like SALC or but just as a broad stroke, maybe like policy limitations and language, I think would be one to add. I mean, I think it'll come up inevitably in each of these issues to address, but I think naming it as an issue of its own so that it can be addressed directly would be good. And then on this fourth item here, on the land use planning and restrictions, the local land use planning and state legislation that can be contradictory and present challenges for small scale diversified ag. That I don't know how to grab onto that one. I sort of don't know. It feels a little too like it has over breadth, and so that's just a little feedback I have there. And maybe that's just feedback I offer, and I don't have to do anything with it because it's just going to look differently as we progress through the meeting. So, but I just wanted to name that as I was reading this, I was like, how do I approach this one? It feels a little too broad. Other than that, though, I think yeah, we've got our fair share of work here.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I can see what you mean about that point. So I think that's exactly the kind of feedback that is helpful, because if and when you as subcommittee members see those moments that you're thinking, I see this point, I don't exactly know what it means or how to jump into it, but you do feel that it is important, then working through that, right? Or as you said, Dorian, letting it unfold, which is another way to approach it. So we will really rely on you as subcommittee members to let us know when and how you want to push something forward, really consider it. And then otherwise how you just want to continue exploring those ideas. I had a really quick follow-up question for you, Dorian, about when you were saying language, are you meaning like the diversity of languages and language speakers in California? Is that what you meant by language? Or do you mean like the legal language that then determines outcomes? I just didn't know what, like if both of those or one component of those.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I was speaking to the legal language, so what's actually written in the sort of intent of these programs, or
Okay.
the guidelines, for example. Yeah, so more to the legal language or guideline language that guides the programs.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Any other thoughts or additions from?
Not on my end, no.
Okay. So let's go to that next slide and let's see whether, I mean, Dorian, you said it well. There's a lot of work to do in this subcommittee, and you both have also gestured to how this topic is going to matter across a variety of approaches to the work that the task force is doing, right? So whether that's taken up in sustaining natural and cultural resources, whether the grants and resource subcommittee, right? There will be a few ways in which this work will be shared across the task force and its subcommittees. So we were this is a proposal, again, just an initial idea for you both in terms of how to continue to move forward as this subcommittee and what work would kind of belong to this subcommittee to then be shared out with the task force. So really our role as staff is to, as we learn from task force members, what is prioritized, what needs to be addressed, what kinds of recommendations need to be thought through and drafted, we have to find like ways to operationalize that, right? So this is our suggestion for how this subcommittee could be part of that process. So we were imagining between, next month and January. These are 3 things that we thought you might want to consider bringing in some speakers to address. And we were proposing those as speaker presentations within the context of this subcommittee, but they would of course be invitations they'll be public and they would be invitations to the task force, right? So other task force members can attend and listen in. So it's not that only this subcommittee would be able to learn from that, and then this subcommittee could share the insights, right, that they learned from these presentations with that full task force. But we had identified 3 things we thought you might be interested to have speakers come and give a presentation and discussion with you. Zoning ordinances and land use planning. So sort of the city, county level, right? State and federal oversight and impacts on land use. And then easements and covenants in relation to decision-making and sovereignty. Things like housing restrictions, something like that, as it comes from those kinds of agreements. So those are 3 things we proposed. And then I wanted to point out that there are 2 members of this subcommittee, right? So you might both remember that the way that Bagley Keene works is that you do have the opportunity to form working groups of 2 members. 1 or 2 people could basically take on a piece of work, move that work forward, and then of course bring the whatever material was created or generated in that working group back into the public space of the task force or the subcommittee. So there are a few ways that you both could start kind of drafting ideas and thinking about ideas as you learn or as you have these conversations in the interim. You could, and staff are here to support this, right? So you can connect the 2 of you and have a phone call. You could have a Zoom meeting. If you wanted staff there to take notes, we would be there. You don't always have to have us there. It could be kind of your choice, but we're here to support. Another thing that we can do, or that you could consider doing as a subcommittee of 2 members, is to actually share working documents where you draft ideas and you provide feedback to one another. And then that work that's done in the interim, it comes back to the task force. So I'm sorry, I know I'm talking a lot, but let me just kind of share these deadlines and then I'm gonna stop talking and hear what you both think about this. These are the deadlines that we have in our mind as staff for the task force. In November, you would want to give an update to the task force, and it would be sort of up to you both in terms of what work is done to that point that you want to share. By January 2024, we're hoping that this subcommittee could have done some initial ideas and recommendations that staff can help support, right, in drafting that language. Whatever you need from us, we're here to do that. And that would actually be included in a preliminary draft of recommendations that will be shared in the February 2025 meeting of the task force. And when I say preliminary, I very much mean preliminary. It will probably look more like an outline than it will a full-fledged draft. But we're really aiming for that February 2025 to have that outline, right, that sketch of recommendations to the task force. So I hope that is clear and makes sense. I'll stop here and I'll let you both jump in with thoughts, responses, questions.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the items in the last slide that we identified as being cross-referenced with S and to sustaining natural and cultural resources. I'm wondering how those are going to look in the work plan. Is this something we can create work groups with members of that that subcommittee? I'm just thinking of how to address them in the working plan. That's the first question that I have, and then you answered my other question with the deadline. So
to answer that question quickly, working groups. The limitation on those is that it's 1 or 2 people can be working offline at any given time. So I do believe that there is an opportunity to set up working groups that would bring together task force members from separate subcommittees. It's really as a matter of the quantity of people working on that. And then those people would need to share what they're working on in a public space, if that makes sense. So then the working group would need to bring those draft recommendations or those ideas to each of those subcommittees, we would have public subcommittee meetings and or the full task force meeting. Does that make sense? Okay, so work can kind of continue between two members of the subcommittee, or sorry, two members of the task force with staff support. And then the sharing out of that happens in the public space of these meetings.
Mhm. And to clarify, the working groups are not public meetings, or they are?
No, the working groups do
Yeah.
not need to be,
Okay.
yeah, so that's how you could have like a shared Google Doc.
Okay, I hear you. Huh.
Yeah.
Were you done, Dorian?
Yes.
I yeah, I'm not sure how many more meetings I can add to my calendar outside of our task force meetings and the subcommittee meetings. I could do, yeah, occasional working group meet, but definitely would be open up to the shared document so that
Okay.
it's like an open dialogue there, or open line of communication there where we can, add to it and all that good stuff.
Great, that's helpful to know that that's probably a better way to engage in the interim.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And the preliminary, that's not just isolated to this subcommittee, but it would be from each subcommittee, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, what we're aiming to give to the task force in February 2025 is a preliminary draft of that report. So what we're going to ask all subcommittees to do, and they're at different phases, in their work process, but we're hoping that we will have something from each of those that will then inform that preliminary draft that the task force reviews as a group in February. And really that's to get us ready for May 2025, having a full first draft of the report of recommendations.
Okay.
How are you? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dorian.
Yeah, I just had one more question back to the SNRC and maybe also curious how you're feeling about it, Emily. I know you're at limited capacity, but there are some things here or from the items in the previous slide, related to sovereignty that maybe aren't being reflected on the work plan, and I think that's okay. But I'm just curious if if those are some things that we want to add to this work plan, or if that's something that we want to maybe leave for the sustaining natural and cultural resources work plan. So I'm just thinking of, yeah, so some of I guess the sovereignty piece is there for the easements, but more specific to, to California Native nations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with you. It would be good to include.
And when you say include, do you imagine sort of bringing together, like, so let's say you'd like to hear from someone who can describe, right, current land use governance restrictions, right, on allotments, things like that, that opportunity would be shared sort of across those. There'd be a way that those subcommittees could be working together, or do you mean within this subcommittee you'd like to take a piece of that? I guess I'm wondering for both of you, how would you most like to envision that work? And I know, Emily, you're on that other subcommittee, so maybe you have some thoughts on how that work could be brought together or distinguished, depending on what you think's best.
I think it would support each other.
Okay.
Like as you were talking about the possible speaker presentations to address, the city planners, the federal, state and federal oversight folks, they don't necessarily come with the intention of protecting tribal nation sovereignty or cultural resources. So that was something that was coming up for me too when you were talking about that. I was like, okay, it's good to hear from what you listed, but I'm also thinking of what could also be added to, which is, yeah. the tribal sovereignty side of things. Was that the last, that last bulletin? Was that maybe?
Yeah, well, I think that probably tribal sovereignty would be tribal nations, right? Would be part of each of these. But
Yeah.
I think what I hear you saying, Emily and Dorian, is that being very explicit in this work plan, that is a consideration in each of these will be really important.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know, for instance, that when we next meet with the Sustaining Natural and Cultural Resources Subcommittee, we will be talking about sort of different state and federal laws related to things like cultural fires and how that impacts the ability to implement sovereignty, right? Depending on whether you're on state or federal land, right? So I think that it will be part of these conversations. And to the extent that you both have ideas for how to make sure that those conversations then are shared out with other subcommittees, with the full task force, that would really be something we would ask for your help, right? Making sure that those things are shared in the best way so that other conversations can continue moving with other task force members.
For sure.
Megan, will you maybe go back to the previous slide and let's just see whether, Emily and Dorian, there's anything that you maybe isn't in this work plan. I know a lot of these things kind of point to the SNCR, so just wanted to put this back up in case you're thinking we really want to make sure we make room for this.
I guess two things that come up for me, and this might be specific, but I'm already thinking about it of like potential speakers or people that we engage with and seek input from. But reading some of these topics like stipulations on land use that don't align with California Native American practices of stewardship, I'm thinking, very practically, like the administration of the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Program, for example. There's recipients of that grant that we can really interview and see, how has this been able to play out for you? Have there been limitations? And so there's very particular pieces here that, that do, of course, relate to this whole subcommittee, but that are California Native specific, or even just like legal frameworks that support California Native American land management practices. We can speak to just how does land use play into nation to nation communication, right? So like between the state of California and Native nations themselves. So very practically there too, right? Like what does the trust or the fee to trust process look like? So things like that, I think that could very much fit in, squarely here and can be an item of its own, but of course it's also why I wondered, or, they could be housed in the sustaining natural and cultural resources. I mean, I'm not partial.
So we're a little bit in controlled chaos stage. Like when you first open up a 1,000-piece puzzle and you dump it on the table and you're like, whoa, there's all this great stuff here. And somehow it's all going to fit together, but it's going to take us some time to sort through. So also hearing that everyone has great ideas. You all have your own networks of contacts and your own expertise and your own experience, plus limited time. Plus, we're working in tandem with other groups, and naturally, some of our conversation threads are going to overlap. So I think we just need to be patient and give ourselves space to start sorting out, kind of untangling those webs or figuring out where those puzzle pieces go. I love the idea of working on a collaborative working document. We might be able to even use this framework, kind of column type of framework that we've extracted from the work plan as a space to add notes into. Maybe you build out, we can take some of the comments today and start to build out and add a little color flavor to the issues to address and connecting those to potential solutions as we take our time over the next couple of months to really think through and work through those ideas and solutions together. What you just said, what you just explained, Dorian, and when you were talking about thinking about other potential speakers, made me also want to offer, I know it might be a little overwhelming. We're offering a lot of ways to advance this work, but not every informational conversation that task force members have needs to necessarily be held in the public space. But to the extent that you would like us to try to orchestrate that for everyone so that kind of the broader education occurs, we would be more than happy to make that effort, of course. But we might not have time to do that. So I'm just inviting you both, and I'll do the same for other subcommittees. If you're working on kind of expanding some of your ideas around these topics, and you can maybe have a conversation with an like a program administrator or, someone yourself to help you develop some ideas for further conversation, please feel free to do that on the in-between. And we might learn that this is an important person to invite for a more expansive group discussion. But we are also trusting you as task force members and as experts to go kind of inform yourselves to the extent that you feel like you need to start putting some ideas out on a paper.
Could I just, thanks Megan for that. And hi, Sean here. Sorry, I was late to the beginning. I think one thing to be clear about too is what we have captured here in terms of issues to address is our best attempt to capture what the task force has discussed up to date, but we haven't gone through and prioritized any of that at all. And just because it's on this slide doesn't necessarily mean there are issues that you have to address in the limited time and with the limited resources that you have to do this work. So just, I guess, a suggestion or something that we'd be happy to work with you on as well is to think about how we might prioritize some of these issues, which can then make this exercise a little easier, I think, and hopefully less overwhelming to sort of the 1,000-piece puzzle analogy. We can get that down to a 10-piece puzzle, perhaps we can move forward. But just to repeat myself again, we took everything that you've said, tried to put it up here, but that first step of what are the areas that we want to focus most attention on, what need the most work, we haven't gone through that yet. So I appreciate your guidance as we move forward with it.
Yeah, and if you go forward one slide, Megan, I think that was the proposal was one way of trying to pull out some sort of priorities for this subcommittee, right? Like to jump into that. Those sort of three things to learn more about through this subcommittee, and then this subcommittee brings it into the task force. But it does sound like everyone's sort of interested in making sure that that work is aligning, complementing other work being done, that puzzle element.
Yeah, I think to that point, I just wanted to add, and maybe this is the direction Dorian was already moving, but it might be useful that if Emily and Dorian do feel like these three sub-bullets are generally the three topics you would want to address from the subcommittee, it might be useful to hear from you two about the details of what you do want to hear about each topic, because they are so big still. So if we're going to have a speaker, I hear you definitely want to make sure that that speaker, or maybe we have 1 to 2 speakers, is sharing the perspective on sovereignty and how these issues impact sovereignty. And so what else can you tell us about each of these 3 topics that you would want to learn about?
Yeah, thanks, Tessa. I think, yeah, that's, I mean, at least I can speak for me. Seeing these 3 bullets, I do feel like that's the direction that I would want to go down. It's a nice way to whittle down the, the previous slide. And then, yeah, of course, would just, if it makes sense to add that fourth piece on that's specific and explicit to California Native Nations. And I don't know if what, yeah, Emily thinks about that, but what I was hearing from Emily is that, rather than sort of, yeah, splashing each of these bullet points with pieces on, CA native issues, maybe having a bullet on its own so that we make sure to address it.
Thank you for that. And I do think that staff will actually consider ways that we could maybe host like informational sessions or something like that so that multiple subcommittees can attend right. So if we have interest in the SNCR and we have interest here, those things do not have, the both groups can learn about those issues. So we'll consider ways that we might be able to like make that happen, right? And that's that's kind of I think what I'm hearing you saying too is that issue is also very important here, even if it is also being considered there. So finding ways to make sure that is part of both efforts. What we can, sorry, Dorian, go ahead.
Oh no, just want to say, yeah, sounds good. And thank you for, just wrangling us in. Yeah, I got to remember there's a lot of puzzle pieces.
I was just going to say what we can do from here is Caleb is taking very extensive notes. Thank you, Caleb. So what we will do is we can make these revisions and then actually just after this meeting, of course, we'll have our meeting summary, but we will also communicate back to you. We have this fourth bullet point here, right? And work with you to work on those next steps. So I know, Megan, I'll turn it to you because I know you have an eye on time and everything like that.
Yeah. So I think that's a good, that's the kind of plan that we're following. We'll set up a shared document and we'll move this text into there and then give Dorian and Emily access to the document so you can start adding in your ideas and comment bubbles and have side conversations, whatever, however that works for you. Is there any interest in coordinating a call in October to kind of check in? Is a little premature. We kind of want to maybe sit with this for a few weeks and do a little work on it. What do you both think? You can also say we'll get back to you if you want.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and I'd be happy to also, yeah, be a part of the working group. I hear Emily, talking about capacity, so I'd like to hear, yeah, how you're feeling about it, Emily.
Yeah, I could probably last 2 weeks of October I could be available.
Okay. Great. And maybe it's just kind of a quick check-in between the two of you, and you could say, hey, here's some new ideas I jotted down on the paper. What do you think about that, Dorian? What do you think about that, Emily? And kind of brainstorm together a little bit. And then we can see what we want to, the collective how you both want to report out at the November meeting. And by that time, we'll also have met with the other subcommittees as well. So, okay, that's helpful. So working document, expanding these bullets, kind of roughly sticking to this timeline here, and then we'll explore the best way to bring in some speakers to touch on these 4 topics. I know there's only 3 bullets up here, but we'll add that one about California Native Nations and sovereignty. So that's feeling pretty good. Let's see. We've got just a couple of minutes left before we check in with public comments. I just wanted to ask the question to see if there's anything on this list or those other 3+1 bullets that you wanted to raise to priority, that a lot about, that you're like, hey, because I have just some experience on this, it's easiest for me to talk about this first, or because there's urgency around it, or maybe a lot of information gathering about it, and the impact of a connected recommendation would be strong, that you wanted to raise to priority. That would give us a little more direction, us being staff. Maybe marinate on that. And in the collective working document, if something starts to emerge for you as priority, just indicate that with a highlight or comment bubble or something. And conversely, if something's falling lower down the ladder rung of the prioritization, you know, you could say, let's do this if time, but maybe it's not quite as much bang for our buck. You know, you'll kind of get a sense of that as we start to work through. Okay. May we check in? We've got just a few folks joining us as attendees. Anyone interested in a public comment, either on the proposed work plan approach or also in general related to task force business? If so, you're welcome to raise your hand or complete our form at the usual location at the sgc.ca.gov website. Okay, not seeing any come through.
There's
Oh,
one right.
wonderful. Lauren, when you're ready, please go ahead. Can we give you permission to unmute? I'm not a co-host, so I can't. I'll ask for Tessa to maybe help. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My comment is actually just to give gratitude for you all on staff and also members of this subcommittee. Just really grateful that your brilliant minds are working on this. And I'm calling in as a representative from the People's Land Fund in California.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And also, conversely, thank you for joining us and tracking the task force progress. Okay, we have one slide on upcoming meetings. And so this was the first of a series of subcommittee meetings that we have scheduled over the next couple of weeks. Tomorrow is Grants and Resources Subcommittee. That's a longer meeting. That's 2 hours. That'll be the second meeting of Grants and Resources. So they're actually advancing some ideas. All subcommittee meetings are virtual. Then the following day, Thursday, we have Land Tenure Subcommittee. That will be the first meeting of that subcommittee, and it's a working session, very similar format to today's meeting. The following week, we have Land Access and Acquisition. That's a 2-hour time block reserved because there are about 9 task force members on that subcommittee, and there was already some indication of some working groups to establish underneath that subcommittee that folks were brainstorming during the August task force. So we reserved a little more time for that. Then in the first week of October, we'll have the second meeting of Sustaining Natural and Cultural Resources Subcommittee, working to advance some of their ideas, and we'll get some staff reports on the work that staff has been doing at the direction of the subcommittee members from their first meeting. October 7th, Community Outreach, second meeting for that group as well, advancing some ideas and some work products. And then our regular quarterly task force meeting is scheduled for November 13th and 14th. At the guidance and direction of the task force, from the August meeting, we are moving that meeting location to Salinas. We're working to secure a venue. So our task force members, the majority, if not all of them, will be participating in person. But of course, there's a virtual option if for some reason a task force member can't make it in person, or a member of the public is interested to listen in and attend virtually. So more on that coming soon. It is also possible that some of the subcommittees will meet in advance of that November meeting. Maybe some of the groups who are meeting in September might meet again in October, and we'll keep folks posted as we go along here. And as always, you can find notes, recordings, and materials posted to our project website. We're actually building that out with help and support from the Community Outreach Subcommittee. So there's more content there and it's a little bit more accessible. And if you're looking for that link, go ahead and let us know. And there's also instructions and links on the project website for submitting written public comment in between subcommittee and task force meetings as well. So I think that is it for us today. I'm going to stop share and just take one more moment to thank both Emily and Dorian for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to working with you on these issues, and we'll get going with a collaborative working doc probably this week in the next couple of days. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, you've got us here as support. So let us know what you need. Anything else from Dorian or Emily?
Just gratitude for facilitation and support. Yeah, thank you all.
This is a really great team of people to be working with, task force members and staff all combined. I'm really excited to see our puzzle come together in the next couple of months. By the time February 2025 rolls around, we're going to really have some good stuff together. So thank you, everyone. Staff, Camille.
Oh, I noted Emily had unmuted. Emily, if you wanted to say anything.
No, just saying thank you for making time, and I'm not sure if Lauren's hand is still up from last time or if she had another question, but I noticed it was raised. Okay, it's down now.
Take it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just echo everyone. Thank you so much for taking on this work. Excited to keep working on it.
Excellent.
Thank you all.
Have
Thanks,
a
everyone.
look.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. I think we're still live too.
Oh.
It's re-recorded. Okay, cool.